Listening to the BamaInsider.com podcast. My name is Trey Annity. I am joined with beat writers Tyler Waldrop and Tony Tsoukalis. Guys, spring football is just around the corner. Only a week and 3 days. Friday the 13th, I believe it is. A little bit spooky there, but only just a little bit away now. A lot of storylines this spring for Alabama football, but the biggest, why don't we just jump right into it, the quarterback battle. Bryce Young, coming in from California, the five-star recruit, will be taking on Mac Jones, the returnee for his senior season. What are your guys' thoughts and maybe an early favorite in this battle? Tony, you want to get us started?
Yeah, I mean, we had a year off of a quarterback battle last year, and now we're back at it. It's going to be a hot one as well. You look, like you said, I think the two that you got to watch coming out of the gate is Mac Jones, the returning, I guess you can call him the returning starter. He did take over for Tua. And then Bryce Young, the five-star freshman, who's, just the dynamo in himself. If you look at the way that Mac Jones ended the season, he did great. He did everything you'd expect him to do. He ran the offense the way that you'd expect him to. And Alabama really didn't miss a beat offensively. So it's kind of hard to take that job away from him, especially if you look at, barring the 2 pick sixes against Auburn and Michigan, 2 great games against 2 great defenses. Hard to argue with that. I would call him the favorite coming into camp. But then again, you look at a guy like Bryce Young, and he's an elite talent. The kind of guy, the same kind of talk you get when Tua came into the program as that guy that's a potential Heisman winner. I've seen him compared to Kyler Murray. He's a guy that can run with the ball. He's probably a little bit quicker than Mac Jones, although Mac Jones' speed gets undervalued. I think Mac Jones has a little bit more athleticism than people say. But, yeah, it's going to be definitely a close one to watch and an exciting one. I don't really think Alabama can go wrong with either way. I think it's just going to be who performs the best.
Now, obviously, this battle is similar to the Tua versus Jalen battle we saw just a short time ago. Are they going to roll this out similarly, or do we see one guy start game one and then maybe the second half of that very same game we see the other? How are they going to go about this?
Well, it's too early to tell how many quarterbacks are going to be involved in game one, but I think if you look at Saban's track record, you should expect at least 2 quarterbacks to get meaningful snaps in the first game. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's really going to depend on who does well. I think we're really far out on that. Like I said, I think Mac Jones is the favorite. I think if he does not lose the competition, I think it might just be his show. When you look at what Bryce Young can offer, possible that maybe they put in a package for him or just get him into games. There's different things you can do with him. But me personally, I think that if Mac Jones performs the way we've been seeing him play, it might just be his show. I don't know if it's going to be as back and forth. I don't know if necessarily there'll be a package for Bryce in the 3rd set of downs or whatever, the way that they kind of rolled it out with Jalen and Tua.
Wouldn't you think, though, Bryce Young might have the highest ceiling of the 2?
Perhaps. You haven't seen him yet. From what from what we've heard about him, he sure has a high ceiling, so maybe he does. But I think when you look at just the experience, and then also I think Mac Jones has a pretty high ceiling as well. So I don't think you can really sell him short.
Well, there's those 2, but also, guys, we can't forget about Taulia Tagovailoa. His brother is moving on to the NFL, but there are names outside of those 2 that are fighting for this spot. Does Taulia have a legitimate chance at getting solid minutes this year?
Yeah, and this is my biggest question is I spent the last season in Tallahassee covering Florida State. So I wasn't day in and day out with the program. But just from watching the games from afar, I did wonder, how did Mac Jones kind of separate himself as the number 2 guy? And it seems like Tua's brother never really emerged in that picture. And for someone who wasn't here, that was a big question for me. And why aren't we talking about him right now?
I think that it's a good point. I think Taulia is a good talent, and we haven't really seen much of him either outside of maybe that Arkansas game and a little bit against Western Carolina. Be interesting. He's a guy that can do a lot of things. He's shifty and elusive in the pocket, kind of like his brother is. I don't want to totally compare him to his brother. I think that's kind of a cop out, but he can make plays. He's got some mobility. probably not as much as Bryce Young, but enough to move, enough to get away from defenders, and he's got an arm too. He's pretty strong, and he was a winner at Thompson High School, in Alabama after moving with his family, and so I think he's another dark horse option. I still think that those two would be my favorites heading into camp, but I wouldn't count out Talia at all.
I mean, just talking a little bit more about him, my experience with Talia is last year's A-Day game. But just watching him play that game, I mean, he had some really terrible decisions when he threw the ball into coverage, which shouldn't have been made. But, I mean, he also made just an incredible throw for a touchdown, I think, right near the end of the game that kind of gave you that glimpse of, oh, yeah, he can make those same throws that Tua can, the bad ones and the good ones. So with that being my limited experience, I kind of think, is there a chance that he just needs a little more polish than Tua needed to kind of step into a similar role? Maybe not the same role, because obviously I think we agree Tua is a pretty once-in-a-generation type talent.
I feel like this offense is going to be pretty smooth any way you draw it. Obviously, we saw Mac, prove himself at times when he was inserted into the offense, but the defense is going to need to make major adjustments if they want to be competitive this year. Obviously, you look at games like LSU. You look at certain matchups that didn't really favor Alabama, and it was a young defense, but what adjustments need to be made, let's say specifically in the pass rush, to get this defense ready to go here in spring camp?
I would say the biggest thing Alabama needs to do from a pass rushing standpoint is get home when you're going after the quarterback. There were just numerous times when the pass rush is able to, get into the backfield, but like against LSU, it's not that guys weren't there. They just couldn't bring him down. They just whiffed at times. And I, at least, again, watching from afar, that was kind of the thing that I noticed. It's not that they couldn't always get leverage. It was just they couldn't follow up with that.
Yeah, and so if you're talking about pass rush as well, you're losing your two best pass rushers in Anthony Jennings and Terrell Lewis. There's a lot of talent coming in. You look at, guys like Will Anderson, Chris Braswell, Quindarius Robinson, Drew Sanders, 4 guys, true freshman guys, 4- and 5-star guys that can really come in and make a difference. I think one of those guys will step up. I don't know necessarily who, but there's just so much talent there that one of those guys will step up and kind of get that starting role maybe, or at least be in contention, be a guy that, brings some danger to that pass rush. There's also guys like King Makuta and Christopher Allen that kind of have that. They're on the verge of that breakout status at that position as well. I think when you look at the defense, one of the things that jumps out as a concern to me is you've got inexperience at that outside linebacker position and then a little bit of inexperience in the secondary as well. Those two mixing together, if you can't get to the quarterback and then maybe your secondary is not as experienced, that leads to some big plays, kind of fill in the blank there. That being said, in recent years, we've doubted positions at Alabama and then been proven wrong within 3 weeks. I feel like every single year we talk about the secondary being inexperienced, and then come week 3 or week 4, they're already locked in and it's seamless. So it's going to be interesting. I think this spring's kind of the first step towards seeing that all play out. But that would be the biggest question mark I have, is the combination of those two position groupings, and can you find enough experience and comfortability at those two spots as early as you can?
I think there's been a little bit of disrest, I guess, with Pete Golding leading the defense. Is that necessary? Is that justified, or is Pete Golding just kind of thrown into the situation at the wrong time this past year?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to blame, and I think he's just taken a lot of it. I'm not sure that he's as at fault as maybe he's been blamed for. It's really tough when you lose your two signal callers in the middle, in Dylan Moses and Joshua McMillan. So you're relying at that point on freshmen to make calls, and so I think where Pete Golding probably didn't simplify it enough for his players, and probably didn't play to what he had at the moment. I think he had that plan of how things were going to work with Dylan and McMillan, and when it didn't work, I don't think he adapted well. And so I think by looking at that, what I want to see from him is, you might run into those same kind of problem areas in the secondary, or in your pass rush. Are you going to be able to get through to those younger players and get them to perform at the level that you need them to kind of answer those questions. I think it's definitely going to help when you have Dylan Moses on the field to kind of help with that, though.
Certainly.
I mean, I would go so far to say that we didn't see a single snap of Pete Golding's defense last year, just because, like you said, without those linebackers, veterans that he's counting on, and especially at such a crucial position, I don't know that it's fair to really assess. I mean, at some point, injuries are going to happen to every team. He has to be able to find a way to recover, but losing those guys right off the bat, I don't know that we really saw what he can do as far as coaching a defense. Now, it's possible that Alabama will come out, play defense in a similar fashion this year, and then you can kind of go, we have a larger sample size. Maybe he is a big part of the problem, but it's also, I think it's possible at least that injuries just kind of bit Alabama too hard before they really had a chance.
Yeah, I mean, the injuries are part of football, though, and I think you do have a really deep roster, so you can say that, but at the same time, he is going to have a key. Alabama will have a key injury on defense this year because that's just the way football works.
Before the season, though.
You don't know. I mean, that could very well happen. If you look at the past seasons, I mean, look at the season before last, you had Terrell Lewis. You lost him for the season. This season, you had Dylan Moses. So if you go into this season and you're surprised, let's say, I don't know, like LeBron Ray gets hurt at the beginning of the season. I'm not wishing anything on anyone, but like, let's say that happens. You've got to be able to adapt to that, If Patrick Surtain goes out for the year in week 1, you've got to be able to adapt for that. And that's actually the comparison to what Dylan was last year. If Patrick Surtain was to go out this year, that's how big it would be comparatively to what they lost in Dylan. But even if that happens, I think now you're going to have to see Pete do a better job of compensating for that.
There was really just a lack of leadership. I think you hit it right on the nose with the loss of Moses this past year, and with such a young group, they needed somebody to step up, and they couldn't get it. It was the complete opposite on the other side of the ball, especially with that receiving core. It felt like every single player, could have been the best receiver on their team anywhere in the country. And now a lot of those guys are moving on to the next level, but guys like Galen Waddell and Tyrell Shavers are going to have to step up. We've kind of hit on it a little bit earlier in our podcast, but is this receiving core going to be nearly the same, anywhere, I guess, near the same as what it was? Obviously, you can't replace a guy like Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs, but there's a lot of talent still with Jalen Waddle and Tyrell Shavers and some recruits coming in. Do we see some replacements step up, or what's going to be the deal with this group?
Yeah, and you didn't mention the leading receiver in Devontae Smith.
Devontae Smith as well.
Always gets forgotten about. A very quiet,
the most slept-on receiver in the country, maybe.
Sure, and I think when you say he can still be that leader. Obviously, I think he can put together another season like he did last year. He's got that kind of talent, and then if you look at a guy like Jalen Waddle, I think he's very similar to a guy like Henry Ruggs. Maybe more dynamic with the ball in his hand. So actually, I definitely think he's more dynamic probably than anybody in the country with the ball in his hands. So you've got those two that are kind of going to lead the unit. And then you've also got guys like John Mechie III. I think Slade Bolden's a guy that can be a really useful part in a lot of different ways. And I think the fans really want to see Tyrell Shavers grow into his potential because he's a 6'6" guy that can run. That's such a dangerous, combination. Even when you look at Alabama's elite receivers, they never had that like really tall guy. I think Jerry Jeudy was like 6'2" and kind of the tallest of the bigger guys. So I think when you look at Tyrell Shavers, he brings a whole nother dimension to that unit that Alabama really hasn't seen.
Definitely, and I think we see guys like Tyrell Shavers really step up because they're getting the opportunities now.
I don't think Alabama needs to replace the production of those two guys. I don't know that we need to talk about it that way. I mean, it was almost like Alabama had to manufacture a way to make sure all four receivers were involved last year at times. So I think there might almost be addition by subtraction. You get a couple more targets for Waddle a game. You get a couple more for Smith. And I think you need a third guy to step up and take a little pressure off those two guys. But it's not like the years when it was, okay, Alabama's going to throw it to Cooper 30 35 times a game, and everyone knows it's going to Cooper, and you just see what happens. I mean, Alabama has 2 elite receivers, and I think we agree that Waddle could have his best year next year.
Yeah, I think that obviously you'd rather have Judy and Ruggs back, but I think that if you had it, it's not an area of concern for Alabama at all. I think with the talent that we've talked about, it's not something you should be worried about. I think having Devontae Smith come back, I think they probably would have been fine with just Waddle. If all 3 of the primary receivers, the starters left, so if Devontae Smith left, I think, Alabama would have still been in good shape. Now that they have those 2 guys, there's nothing to worry about. But you do need to develop that depth, because you saw teams try to take away Jerry Jeudy, and then you could just throw the ball to one of the other 2 guys. They might try to do that with Galen Waddell, or they might try to do that with Devontae Smith. So there's got to be guys that can kind of step up and fill that depth void. So you're going to need 3 for this offense to work. You're going to need the 3 receivers, and so you're going to need that 3rd guy, whether it be Mechie or Bolden or Shavers or someone else, to step up and to kind of perform at that starter level. And all of those guys I just mentioned have the ability to do that.
I think depth could come along, as the season goes on, like you said, if one of these guys steps up. But one position group that is not going to be lacking depth this year is the running back group. Trey Sanders is healthy. I guess now starting his Heisman campaign, if you guys remember his tweets.
He did say
from back in the
freshman
day.
year.
It was, yes. So this
still
is
in contention.
This is the campaign here. And obviously Najee Harris returning as well. What are we going to get out of this group?
The interesting thing for me is, how do you keep Najee happy? Because he came back to improve his draft stock, and now he's in a deeper running back room. Yeah, I don't know that Najee's going to necessarily get more carries this year. In fact, I think you could argue that he'd get less. Just look at what the depth Alabama has. Let's run through it. It's Najee Harris, 5-star. Trey Sanders, 5-star. Brian Robinson, 4-star. Keelan Robinson, 4-star. And then you've got 3 4-star running backs coming in behind all of that. And you got to think one of those guys might, have a breakout spring or something like that. So a lot of depth to go around. I don't think you're going to get a lot of 20 carry games unless they just find that that's what you have to do with Najee. And, I think some people would argue that maybe that is what you have to do with Najee, but I don't necessarily see that system working with just the amount of mouths you need to feed.
See, I disagree with you here, because I do think, looking at Najee's entire career at Alabama, he exploded down the stretch last season when they finally gave him the touches. When he was getting 8, 10, even 12 touches a game, he was maybe not disappointing, but certainly wasn't like exciting. He wasn't the headliner. It was Tua, the wide receivers, and Najee's there. I mean, Najee exploded down the stretch once he got fed, and I think Najee might be one of those running backs that needs that workload to succeed. And I mean, the pace he was on the last 8 games, he was on the same pace. He was going to have more yards or a similar amount of yards and similar amount of carries as Ingram and Yeldon had the years that they were big and the years that they went to New York. And he had more touchdowns, or he was on pace for more touchdowns, I believe. He was on pace for the last 8 games. If you extrapolate that to a whole season, 13 games, he would have had 29 touchdowns. And I just think if Najee can get you 25 touchdowns, but you have to give him, 18 carries a game or 18 total touches, counting receptions, I think Alabama has to do that, especially with this offense, especially without Tua. No matter who wins the quarterback job, I think maybe the first 2 or 3 games, especially with Georgia being early in the season, you might need to lean on the run game just for a little bit.
I mean, could that come at the cost, or, how do you then keep a guy like Trey Sanders, who's now worked his way back from an injury, has the same level of elite talent as Najee Harris? How do you keep a guy like that healthy? How do you keep a guy like Brian Robinson, who's waited his turn and theoretically should have his shot, happy? I'm not saying that's, you're not running a daycare here. You can't keep everyone happy, right? But at the same time, I think that there's a way to make it work with using more. It's something that, we've seen Alabama do in the past. I think part of the reason why that didn't work last year is I think at times Brian Robinson struggled, and I don't think you had much behind Najee Harris in terms of experience depth. And now I think with Keelan Robinson coming back, I think you'd hope that Brian Robinson improves, and then I think Trey Sanders is at another level of talent that you just can't ignore. As tempting as it would be to just give Najee the ball for the bulk of it, make him into that real bell cow back. I'm not sure that I like that situation. I think I kind of like spreading it out. I just think there's so much talent here. I mean, we're talking about the nation's best backfield. Why not utilize it? Why not keep guys fresh? And I think, to say that Najee only can run when he gets the ball a certain amount of times, I think we saw Najee mature as a back. And hopefully, for Alabama's sake, that maturity leads to him being able to work with possibly less carries. Maybe he's seeing his holes better. Maybe he can better utilize and capitalize on the fresh legs and create more explosion.
I think this Alabama team is going to be just like a puzzle where you kind of have to fit it together to make it work. And it might take a few tries, but if they can get the lineup set correctly, this team's going to have a great chance of getting back to the college football playoff this year and back to the national championship. We've talked about Galen Waddell a decent bit as a receiver, but definitely some conversation going on about his kicking, returning abilities. Had some incredible kick returns there down the stretch at the end of the season. Do we see him continue in this role? He's the obvious choice for it, but are they looking after his health maybe by throwing somebody else back there?
I feel like, again, it's so early to speculate on that, but I feel like Saban would like for Waddle to not have that duty, or at least not be the only guy they can trust back there in that duty. Because I assume, if Waddle has a larger role in the offense, he's going to need more time off the field, and also you want to expose him to less injuries. What do you think?
I think in a normal case, if you had a guy that was your best punt returner and that was also a starter, that would be the case. But I think Jalen Waddle is so good at this job. He's elite. He's the best in the nation. And to take that away from the special teams unit is just too tough for me to do. If you had someone that could be as elite as Jalen Waddle that wasn't a starter, sure. But I think you could argue that Jalen Waddle had a big role last year too. And he still played it. You've seen people that have been starters that have done it. You also saw Eddie Jackson get hurt doing it, so that might have cost Alabama a national championship. Yeah. So there's pros and cons to doing it. He's so elite at this job. He's arguably and in my opinion the best punt returner Alabama's ever had. So to take that away from him, I feel like you're kind of handicapping yourself. And I think that if you look at it from Jalen Waddle's standpoint, that's something that an NFL team is probably going to want him to do at the next level. So I think you might even be kind of handicapping him in a bit with his potential of being able to show NFL teams what he can do.
Tyler, I see you shaking your head over there. Are you in disagreement?
I mainly just disagree with the point that might handicap him from a professional standpoint. I think
in terms of showing what he can do.
Well, yeah, but I think Waddle's got enough film returning that I think NFL teams kind of know what they're getting at this point. And I'm not.
It's something that he's going to have to do at the next level.
Yeah.
So why would he not do it now? Is basically what I'm thinking. If he's going to get hurt now, then he'd get hurt in the NFL.
I think it was kind of a way for Waddle to make himself early on in his career at Alabama was by returning the football so well. People just love that spark of electricity. It's almost like a home run. It's that big moment that gets everybody excited, and a score for his team as well.
Will teams even kick to him?
And that could be another strategy that this team uses as well with the special teams. Make him such a threat that you don't want to have to kick to him. We'll see how it plays out. But one thing that the Alabama fan base really is hoping plays out better this season is the kicking unit. There's just been so many struggles, and we can point to not just one guy, but several kickers in the past that just have not met the criteria and the standard that the rest of the team carries himself with. Will Reichert is healthy. He began last season with Alabama, suffered an injury and was not able to play for most of the year. He is supposed to be the answer. Is he going to be the truth to this kicking team?
I think Reichert could be. I have not seen a large enough sample size from him to go out and say the curse, the problem, whatever you want to call it, is solved. Alabama's going to kick field goals and be consistent. The thing I liked about Reichert, just statistically, if you go back and look at his successes, he's got some range on him. And, if you have a 42, 45, 49-yard field goal, then he's been pretty reliable historically, at knocking those through. And there have been years where anything over 40, maybe, Alabama's maybe not kicking because they've just seen enough.
He's also a confident kid, and I think that range with his confidence, I don't think, I think, what was he, only like 5 of 7 or something? He wasn't, maybe 4 or 7 last year. He wasn't actually like automatic. We saw him miss some last year before he got injured. It was a really short sample size, but I like his confidence. I like his talent, and everything I've ever heard about him is that he has the chance to be, a next level kicker. So I think, if anyone's going to do it, I think he's got the right mix to do to break this curse, if you want to call it. I do like just keeping him at one thing. I know he can punt. I like keeping him at kicker. I think, if you can find a punter, I think Ty Pirine was somebody that stepped in a walk-on job. If he's the guy, sure. If you find someone else, although I think Ty did a great job, if you find someone else, I think you let them do it. But I don't like the idea of having Will Reichert being the do-it-all guy. Can he do it? Sure. But, you see him overexert himself or maybe take away his concentration, or, he just got injured last year. So I think I have him focusing on kicking and just locking that down. And maybe if he needs to make a punt or something, or if he can do kickoffs, but if he needs to do a punt, then he can. But I think he needs to have a primary role this season.
To go back to what you said about Reichert's confidence, the thing that struck me is, and I don't have the exact distances memorized, but going off the top of my head, I think he missed a 48 and a 46-yard kick against Duke in the first game, and then he hit those same 2 distances the very next week. And I thought that was huge because, you can see a younger guy come in, miss 2 big kicks in his first real kind of, this is my job, let me impress you guys effort out there, but then he comes back and he drills the next 2, and they're watching him doesn't seem like that was the mental game was really a problem for him. I felt like he was a guy that was injury more than anything else is what kind of derailed last season for him and had nothing to do with anything else.
Alabama's going to need an improved kicking unit in some form or fashion. But, hey, I mean, if they hadn't had the kicking team that they had back in 2017, 2nd and 26 never happened. So they have that to thank them for. But Alabama basketball is now facing really elimination. It's over for this team. I think we can say it. And I think we all took Vanderbilt for granted coming into this week. The Crimson Tide still had a chance to make the tournament, but after the loss to the Commodores last night, it's safe to say it's over. What happened? I mean, you guys were both there. You guys witnessed. You sat through the post-game press conference as well. Did it just fall apart? Was it an effort thing? Was it just not being able to defend the 3 ball? Where'd it go wrong?
I mean, Vanderbilt kind of beat Alabama at its own game this season. The Commodores came in and they shot 15 of 28, I believe, beyond the arc. That's the second time Vanderbilt shot 50% or better beyond with the 3-pointer this year, and that's tied for the most they've made this year. They knocked down 15 one other time. So I mean, Vanderbilt basically shot like they haven't shot all season. And Alabama didn't. Alabama missed, I think, 12 of the last 16 shots overall. I think at least half of those probably 3-point shots. I mean, Vanderbilt kind of just ran them off the floor at the end beyond the arc.
I think when you look at it, too, I think that, the biggest key from that game was effort. I think, it's one thing for a team to shoot 50% or whatever, 56%. Like Vanderbilt did, but you also have to let a team do that, and I think Alabama could have played a lot better defense than it did, and I think that's a huge reason why Vanderbilt had their success. It's just they wanted it more. Alabama didn't. Alabama played like a team that took it for granted. I mean, not a ton of effort on the defensive side, and then on the offensive side, all but 2 buckets came from 3 different players. In Kyra Lewis, James Beadle Bolden, and Jaden Shackle. For the rest of Alabama's offense was just gone. And then there's just some lack of effort plays. I mean, Alex Reese had a bad shooting night, but he also just had a bad effort night, in my opinion. And you're gonna need guys like that to show more, to get those tough rebounds, to dive, and it can't just be Herbert Jones. It can't just be James Beetle Bolden. You've got to have that from a whole team. You're playing the SEC. It's not, sure, Vanderbilt's not great, but they're still an SEC team. There's still talent on that team, and if that talent wants it more than you, then that's what's going to happen. It's college basketball, and I think that's what the really frustrating thing for Nate Oates was the fact that he, there's nothing you can really do at that point. If your team doesn't want to play to its level, then there's only, he needs to do a better job of getting his players to get to that level. But once game time rolls around, that's got to be tough for a coach to see, is just, watching the other team just consistently want it more than you down the court.
One thing that I think I saw a lot of fans both during the game on social media and online elsewhere, during the game and after, they asked where was Javian Davis. He had a career game the game before, 20 points, 10 rebounds. He was kind of one of the stars when Alabama beat South Carolina, a team that we all agree is better than Vanderbilt. After the game, when asked about it, Coach Nate Oates said that Vanderbilt, they play smaller. They're not going to have a big guy in there. So Alabama tried to match up with them, and maybe Alabama didn't have the depth. Do you agree with that decision to kind of obviously Beetle Bolden played well, but do you think Alabama should have pulled minutes from somebody else, Beetle or somebody else, and given Davis more run, especially with Reese maybe early, or do you think that was the right roster decision?
Yeah, I mean, you could have put more Davis for Reese, but at the same time, Davis wasn't really having a great game either. You need to get some offense, and you look at a guy like Alex Reese can shoot the ball from three, and if you're looking to get offense,
do you think he should have played both of those guys, though? Like he did the game before?
Yeah.
On size?
I mean, at that point, that's just not what Alabama does. And that's, so when Nate was asked about that after the game, that's kind of like what he said. I can put two centers in there, and I think he considers Reese as a center. It just goes against what Alabama does, and if you start doing that, then you stop playing to your identity. Is Shackelford going to have as good of a game if you do that? Is Kyra going to have as good of a game if you do that? And then so you're kind of robbing Peter to steal from Paul, or I don't know. I kind of sympathize with Nate when it comes to what all he can do. I think these next two games, though, I think you might see a drastic change. You might see a guy inserted into the starting lineup just to make a statement. Find the guys that in practice this week are going to really give it their all. And if that's a guy, I think it's an opportunity for maybe a guy like Jalen Forbes to step in. And if he can show himself, or just anyone that wants to be hungry enough on this team, I think that there's now, at least for the end of the rest of the season, when you consider how Alabama's season shapes up, their tournament hopes are kind of buried. So I think it opens up a spot maybe in this starting lineup for somebody that just wants it. It could create some opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. The smaller lineup was probably the right call. I to me, what stood out as the biggest thing is when you have guys in that aren't playing well, there's nobody to go to. Alabama had all of its perimeter players in for almost the entire game. You couldn't really pull them unless you want to go big. And if you think you can't go big against Vanderbilt, you kind of are just stuck with whatever's out there, whatever anyone's doing. You can't really pull Herb or Kyra or, Beetle even. Like, you can't pull anyone and sit down and talk to them and let them get their head straight or anything else because you just don't have the depth.
Yeah, and it also creates a situation where maybe players know that they're going to play. You can't sit me because there's nobody else to play.
There's nobody else on the team.
Right. And it's not. I don't necessarily think any player's saying that, but maybe mentally they don't challenge themselves as much because they know, well, I'm going to play no matter what. There's literally no other options. That's something that Nate Oates said after the game. He said, the teams that I had that showed the most effort, there was players that knew that if I don't perform to this level, this guy's going to take my spot. And, I think that as an Alabama player, maybe subconsciously you don't feel that. You don't feel that, your spot's being challenged because there's just not enough. I think maybe if you had a Juwan Gary or a James Rojas nipping at your heels, you'd play a little bit better just because you'd have to, or else you wouldn't see the court.
Now, Vanderbilt, obviously coming from Nashville, the city that was devastated just 12 hours before the game by a tornado. Do you think that played into this? Obviously, it was on their minds and in their hearts during this game. If they ever needed to win a game, like they talked about afterwards, it was that game. Were they doing it for the city of Nashville, or did that come into play at all?
The Vanderbilt players and staff kind of alluded that played a role after the game, and I think if you look back, we have experience with that in Tuscaloosa. Right at the spring semester after the storm ripped through town, and then the following fall, it feels like teams had a different focus, a different intensity, and I do think that sort of external, motivation can help you. It's probably a lot easier to. And it probably depends on who you are. There are probably guys on Vanderbilt's roster that played poorly or were distracted by, thinking about people back home or what it was like. But I think we've seen enough evidence with Alabama teams that when you have a disaster like that, sometimes that does give you the motivation to work harder or focus, and maybe you can step up your play a little bit. So I definitely think that played a role.
Yeah, I think if you look at a Vanderbilt team, they had nothing to play for. Theoretically, they're not going to make the tournament. They're not going to make the NIT. They're done after the SEC tournament. But that gave them a chance, something to play for. I think typically a Vanderbilt team in this situation might have just, not played with effort either. They might have already had it all packed in. This gave them a reason to play. And so if you're playing against an Alabama team that's not bringing it, that can create the situation like we had last night. I also feel like maybe if it wasn't for that and Vanderbilt does kind of not play at this max effort, I think maybe Alabama gets by with the performance they had last night. So it might have been a game changer in this game just because it refocused Vanderbilt, and at least one of those teams out there was focused.
Before we move too far on, Nate Oates said John Petty, which obviously I think we agreed. If John Petty was healthy enough to go last night, that game's a lot different. Nate Oates said he's likely, or at least maybe a 50-50 decision for Missouri, seemed like what he was suggesting. And then he would almost definitely play in the SEC tournament the next week. I don't think Petty should even touch the court against Missouri. Why play Petty? How's he going to benefit? It's only a risk to his health. Even if he's 80%, why not wait for him to be 95 or 100% the next week?
Where does this team go? And like you're saying with Petty, does this really affect the lineup too much? I know they were running out the four guards on the perimeter last night. Does Alabama have to adjust their lineup severely moving forward without Petty still?
I think you're going to get Petty back sooner or later, so I'm not sure that anything's going to be too severe. I think it's going to come down to, like I said before, effort, and who shows the most effort. I think the decision to play Petty against Missouri or whenever you bring him back, it's probably going to be a lot up to John in terms of how he's feeling and maybe, his desire. You don't want a guy that's – the whole thing about the rest of this season is going to be effort. So if you want a guy that's concerned or doesn't feel like he should be out there, you don't push a guy to come back, especially not at this point. And maybe John wants to come out here and right the ship. He's a guy that's going to be coming back. He's probably going to be back for his senior year, and maybe he wants to kind of take this team by the scruff of the neck and say, hey, look, this is the way we're going to end the season. It'd be a big time leadership moment if he was able to at least implement that mentally on this team. So I'm not sure if I wouldn't play him against Missouri. I think it'd just really be up to him if he was up for it, if he felt comfortable. I think the biggest thing with him is, can he protect himself on the court? You don't want to risk a long-term injury or a future, any bit of his future on a game that theoretically might not matter that much. But if he wants to play and, these are the type of moments that, might be turning points for the offseason. So I think you got to kind of take advantage of that and just kind of play it by ear.
Certainly, and I think they've been looking for that leadership role from Petty really the whole time he's been at Alabama. He had Colin Sexton on his team his freshman year, but then he was the guy moving forward. He still needs to figure out a way to step into that role completely, and we'll see, if he can get back into the lineup, how it goes for him in this Alabama team the rest of the season. But we mentioned it earlier, some things to take away from this year. I believe this team will still get an NIT bid, probably a decent seed, and I think you can build on that, and they continue to have to play hard because next season is coming faster than we know it, and so many guys are coming back with that. Javon Quinterly, James Rojas, Jawan Gary, all these guys we continue to hit on will be back next season. And I think these games right here are going to determine maybe who gets to start in those games next season, who's going to show the effort right now, and who's going to want it the most. We will be meeting again on Sunday for episode number 4 of the BamaInsider.com podcast. For now, that's about all the time we have. We have the executive producer of our show, Kyle Henderson, in the studio today. We're going to get him on real quick. Give a shout out to the fans. Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Tyler and Tony and Trey, I mean, it's like TTT, so I thought they did a good job. And I think one of the things that I wanted to do is just bring different content to the show, bring different content to the channel. Tony and Tyler obviously do a great job on the team side, and we're trying to get Trey more acclimated to doing producer roles and leading the podcast. And we did a podcast and we brought it on, but we really wanted to improve the audio. So I hope the audio was something that we can improve on. People were talking about passing the mic. They're like passing the mic podcast. So we'll work on getting another mic. We got that. But I hope you enjoyed it. And my live show will be starting once again during spring football. So thanks again for liking, subscribing, continue to support our channel. We sincerely appreciate it. Anything else, guys? We good?
I think that's it.
All right, Trey, why don't you close it out, and then you can end the stream from here. Thanks for watching, everybody. We appreciate it. We'll catch you guys next time.